The young man, once known only as Starkiller, had never known a true sense of belonging. Trained in secrecy and shaped by Darth Vader's relentless will, he had been instructed to bury his own emotions, to let the dark side fester within his every breath, and to obey the commands of a man who simultaneously represented the only father figure he had ever known, and the ultimate symbol of oppression he had ever despised. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, Starkiller's name was whispered in hushed fear, a phantom assassin rumored to exist but never confirmed. Vader's secret, Vader's instrument. Yet deep inside, in the part of his soul that had not been wholly consumed by the dark side, there remained an ember of something else, an unquenchable curiosity about his own potential. From the beginning, Vader had harnessed Starkiller's raw power, molding him into a lethal agent who would further his master's secret agendas. But with every duel, every mission, every test of strength, Starkiller's potential grew. And with that growth came an unspoken question. Where did he truly stand in the grand scheme of the Force? The dark side was his teacher, yet it also threatened to devour him entirely. His existence as a tool fed his rage, and his rage fueled his power. Eventually, like a seed too constrained by its pot, his burgeoning might yearned to break free of Vader's shadow. And in the hidden corners of the galaxy, the first stirrings of that ambition took root. It started as fleeting notions. Starkiller found himself in a meditative stance, though meditation to him was less a method of calm and more a balancing act of suppressing turbulence, thinking of a galaxy where he might one day stand without Vader's dominion overshadowing him. Dismissing those thoughts quickly had become second nature. Vader was the enforcer of the Emperor himself, an embodiment of the dark side's unstoppable will. Who was Starkiller to dream of challenging such a figure? And yet, the question refused to die. Each time Vader tested him, Starkiller stepped closer to that boundary he wasn't supposed to cross. The secret missions took him to hostile worlds, from the scorching deserts of Tatooine to the industrial labyrinths of Nar Shaddaa. He cut down rebel spies, scoured the galaxy for wayward Jedi, and performed other tasks so vile he refused to dwell on them for long. Still, with each conquered foe, his power in the Force broadened, sending surges of energy into every cell of his being. He felt unstoppable until the day he realized that, if he had the power to crush those enemies, perhaps he could stand up to Darth Vader himself. In times of duress, when his missions escalated to near impossible feats, Starkiller sometimes heard voices whispering through the Force. They prodded at his consciousness. It was easy to mistake them for the howling echoes of the dark side itself. Yet there was something more tangible in those voices, a susurration that coalesced into words he'd never dreamed possible. You are meant for greatness beyond him. Overthrow. Ascend. Even so, the notion that he might eclipse Vader at the Emperor's side was as frightening as it was intoxicating. He understood that the Emperor, Darth Sidious, was the apex predator of the Sith. Sidious manipulated entire star systems as if they were pawns on a Dejeric board. He had orchestrated the end of the Jedi Order, turned Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, into a dreaded enforcer, and seized the galaxy under the banner of the Galactic Empire. That a mere assassin or apprentice might stand before that living embodiment of the dark side and claim a seat at his right hand seemed far beyond the realm of possibility. And yet, the dark side thrived on impossibility and arrogance. In those moments, Starkiller sensed an invisible hand coaxing him forward. The transformation from Vader's obedient tool to an individual with an agenda began on a remote outer rim planet whose name Starkiller had already forgotten. He had hunted and dispatched another old Jedi who managed to survive the purge. Throughout the entire mission, Starkiller felt the creeping sense that the Jedi was testing him, not simply defending himself. Why else would the old man, battered and exhausted from a decade of hiding, speak so many cryptic words about choices and destinies? Their lightsabers clashed in a dreary canyon, barren of life, dust swirling under the scorching sun. Starkiller disarmed the Jedi, who dropped to one knee but met Starkiller's masked face with unwavering eyes. You must know, the Jedi had wheezed. You can change things. Starkiller's anger flared. He wanted to end it swiftly and without conversation, for he was trained to do exactly that. But something stilled his hand for a moment. Change? he asked quietly, as if voicing the question was a betrayal of everything Vader had drilled into him. The Jedi, bleeding and weakened, seemed to peer beyond Starkiller's visage, as though seeing into some future not yet written. "You aren't just a sword in Vader's hand," he said, coughing. You have a role that you cannot fathom." Starkiller ended the Jedi's life with a swift strike of the Crimson Blade. But the resonance of those words lingered. Standing above the lifeless body in the canyon, he felt something gnaw at him, a possibility. What if the old man had foreseen the unthinkable? What if his destiny truly diverged from Vader's shadow? The very thought stoked a fire within him, a quiet yet furious hunger. Returning to Vader's flagship, Starkiller found that the sensation refused to dissipate. When he delivered the old Jedi's lightsaber hilt to Vader as proof of his success, he suppressed any hint of the turmoil brewing inside him. He knelt without question, accepted the usual cold praises from the Dark Lord of the Sith, and listened attentively to the next mission directives. Yet, beneath that veneer of submission, the wheels of his mind turned. The next mission dispatched him to a classified Imperial research station orbiting a nameless gas giant. Rumors suggested that a cluster of rebellious engineers had sabotaged the facility, threatening to leak top-secret technology to the Rebel Alliance. Vader wanted them silenced permanently, and Starkiller was an efficient scalpel for such a task. Indeed, he completed it with ruthless efficiency, leaving no survivors. But during the operation, he uncovered data logs that revealed the station wasn't just developing starship weapons. They were also engaged in research about harnessing Force-sensitive children, seeking ways to break and mold them for the Empire's use. Disturbingly, the data implied that these experiments were not solely Vader's initiative. It bore the Emperor's unmistakable signature of cruelty and cunning. In the shadows of that station's main data core, Starkiller stared at the evidence. He recognized that what had been done to him, taken as a boy molded in darkness, might be happening to others. Perhaps it had already happened to countless children across the galaxy. He tried to bury his emotions. Attachment was weakness, compassion was a chain, empathy was a trap. But it was futile. In that moment, he felt a surge of hatred, not just for the Jedi or for his assigned targets, but for the entire apparatus that had used him and so many others. The ferocity of that hatred roiled through him, and the dark side swallowed it gladly. For the first time, Starkiller realized that if he truly wanted to destroy this twisted machine that shaped him, it wouldn't be enough to slay a few Imperial officers or misguided researchers. He needed to strike at the heart, Vader first and then the Emperor. Yet striking out precipitously would only assure his swift death. So he returned to Vader and presented the data, testing his master's reaction. The unreadable mask betrayed nothing, and Vader offered Starkiller no explanation for the research or the Emperor's intentions. Instead, Vader responded with a new directive. The Emperor had learned of Starkiller's prowess and had invited him to Coruscant to prove his worth before the Dark Lord of the Sith himself. This was an unprecedented honor and a perilous test. One false move, one hint of duplicity, and the Emperor would end Starkiller's life with a mere flicker of the Force. Yet the invitation also dangled the possibility that he could earn the Emperor's personal favor. And if he won Sidious's favor, was it not possible that he could shift the balance of power between Vader and himself? On the journey to Coruscant, Starkiller prepared himself in every way he knew. He drilled in the lightsaber forms that Vader had taught him, ensuring each strike remained lethal and precise. He meditated upon the dark side, allowing his anger, his sense of betrayal, and his thirst for more power to seep into every fiber of his being. He invoked the cold memory of that old Jedi's final words. They became a sort of mantra. You can change things. Perhaps the old man had glimpsed this possibility. When the massive Star Destroyer emerged from hyperspace, Coruscant glittered like a malignant jewel in the darkness, its countless city lights pulsing across the planet-wide metropolis. In some ways, it was the nexus of the galaxy, the place where the Emperor's throne overshadowed entire sectors, where the Senate had once convened before being reduced to a mere ceremonial institution, and where Vader and countless Imperial might were always at the beck and call of Darth Sidious. Upon landing in one of the Imperial palace hangars, Starkiller was met by silent red-robed Imperial guards. Their presence unnerved him. These were among the galaxy's most formidable warriors, hand-picked by the Emperor. They guided him into the labyrinthine corridors, past towering obsidian statues and ominous tapestries that celebrated the Emperor's rise. The air felt thick with the dark side, as though the planet itself exhaled malevolence with each breeze. Finally, Starkiller entered the Emperor's private audience chamber. It was smaller than the old Senate chamber, far more intimate, a place specifically designed for clandestine meetings with the Dark Lord. Darth Sidious sat on a black throne, his hooded figure illuminated by an otherworldly glow that came from hidden lights. He appeared almost frail, yet that illusion only served to highlight his cunning and inherent menace. Vader stood silently at Sidious's side, arms folded, massive figure casting a shadow across the polished floor. Starkiller approached, knelt, and waited. It was the Emperor who broke the silence. "So," Sidious rasped, voice dripping with dark amusement, "this is the one you have kept hidden, Lord Vader?" Vader's respirator hissed in the quiet. "Yes, my master. He is the instrument of our will." Sidious let out a low chuckle. "Our will indeed," he said, eyes glowing like embers beneath the dark hood. "Rise, boy. Let me have a look at you." Starkiller rose and lifted his gaze carefully, mindful not to meet Sidious's eyes in an act that could be perceived as aggression. The Emperor studied him, letting the tension mount. Starkiller felt that gaze digging into his essence, as if Sidious could peel back every layer of his being and see all the threads of doubt and ambition that lay coiled within. Perhaps he could, but Starkiller refused to cower in fear. He let himself stand firm, letting his own dark power seep into the air around him, a silent testament to everything he had accomplished. "Lord Vader speaks highly of your skills," Sidious continued, "but I sense conflict in you, curiosity perhaps, maybe even resentment. Interesting. Such traits can be harnessed, if tempered correctly." The Emperor's smile never reached his eyes. "But I must see this power of yours with my own eyes." Without warning, Sidious lifted a gnarled hand and unleashed a flurry of force lightning. Starkiller reacted instantaneously, calling upon his own connection to the dark side to raise a protective barrier. The bolts collided with a shimmering haze of red energy that flickered around Starkiller's upraised palms. For a moment, he resisted the Emperor's assault. Then Sidious intensified his attack, and Starkiller felt raw agony bite into his flesh. He gritted his teeth, forced himself not to scream, and braced with every ounce of strength he possessed. "Good," Sidious crooned, abruptly ceasing the barrage. "You did not grovel or flee. Strength coupled with defiance. Lord Vader, it seems you have succeeded in shaping a worthy blade." Vader made no reply. Perhaps he, too, was studying Starkiller in this moment, evaluating any sign of weakness after being tested by the Emperor's lightning. But Starkiller made certain his stance remained strong, his breathing steady. Inwardly, he seethed. He wanted to lash out, to prove that he was not merely a toy to be tested. But he buried the urge, aware that to openly challenge Sidious was suicide. The time was not yet right. The Emperor rose slowly from his throne. "I shall be watching you closely, child," he said, voice low and ominous. "You will accompany Lord Vader on a mission most crucial to the Empire's future. There is a conspiracy that threatens to disrupt our plans. You will eradicate it, and if you succeed, I may have further use for you." With that, the Emperor dismissed them, and the meeting concluded. As Starkiller turned to leave, he felt Sidious's gaze on him once more, like a predator appraising fresh prey. He suppressed a shudder, reminding himself that if he truly meant to ascend, he would have to contend with that malignant presence eventually. In the days that followed, Starkiller accompanied Vader on a series of missions that seemed designed to flush out pockets of sedition within the Imperial hierarchy. Moffs who grew too independent, or admirals who harbored quiet loyalties to the rebellion, were dealt with swiftly under Vader's watchful eye. Starkiller observed that Vader did not appear to relish these tasks. Indeed, the Dark Lord carried them out with mechanical efficiency. There was no passion in it, only duty. Starkiller, however, found himself analyzing every step. Why was the Emperor so intent on purging these elements now? Was he testing Vader's loyalty as well? Sidious was notoriously paranoid, after all, and Vader's own ambitions were not exactly a secret. Yet as Starkiller hunted down these traitors, he found himself at a crossroads. He was complicit in the Empire's cruelty. That part was undeniable. But a flicker of empathy refused to be extinguished whenever he saw how terrified people became at the sight of him. He remembered the data logs of those Force-sensitive children. Was that to be the future of the galaxy? Endless subjugation, repeated atrocities, all in the name of maintaining the Emperor's dominion? The old Jedi's words returned to him like an echo in his dreams. You can change things, but to change anything he would need more power. The Emperor's power, and to gain that, he had to prove himself indispensable. A tipping point arrived when Vader received intelligence about an especially formidable group of conspirators rumored to be operating from the deep core. According to Imperial intelligence, they were well-funded, secretive, and possibly led by remnants of Jedi or other Force-sensitive individuals who had slipped through the cracks of the Purge. The Emperor commanded Vader to remove this threat quickly. Yet the more Starkiller learned, the more he suspected that the Emperor was orchestrating a grand test for them both. Perhaps Sidious wanted to see if Starkiller could extinguish Force users outside his direct control. Or maybe the Emperor intended to gauge whether Vader would be threatened by his apprentice's capabilities. Whatever the Emperor's motives, the mission took them far from Coruscant and into treacherous territory. A network of hidden bases awaited them, each protected by advanced security systems and militant defenders. Starkiller descended upon them like a predator unleashed, crossing blades with rogue dark-side cultists, slicing through squads of well-armed mercenaries, and outmaneuvering cunning strategists who utilized experimental shielding technology. With each victory, Starkiller's confidence swelled. With each brush with death, his fury sharpened. He was no longer content merely to serve. He sought to surpass. Darth Vader, for his part, seemed increasingly withdrawn. Sometimes Starkiller caught the faintest impression through the Force that Vader was analyzing him as one might analyze a rival. The master-apprentice dynamic had always been cold, but now it was laced with a distinct sense of tension. Neither spoke of it openly, but both understood that the day might come when their paths would violently diverge. Starkiller made certain to project loyalty, despite his growing ambitions. He executed Vader's directives without complaint, employing his cunning to uncover each secret facility and coordinate precise strikes that left the conspirators reeling. By the end of the campaign, scores of enemies lay in ruin, and the final holdout was cornered on an old, abandoned planet scarred by ancient wars. Underground catacombs, rumored to predate even the Old Republic, served as the conspirators' last redoubt. In the cavernous darkness of that place, lit only by flickering torches, Starkiller confronted the heart of the conspiracy. An aged woman clothed in ragged Jedi robes, her eyes glowing with sorrow and resolve. Her name was unimportant to him. What mattered was that she stood in his way. She carried a lightsaber of unique design, the hilt inlaid with archaic symbols that seemed to pulse with the Force. Starkiller ignited his crimson blade, preparing to strike her down. Yet she did not attack immediately. Instead, she held her saber at the ready, voice echoing in the catacombs. "I knew you would come," she said, her words resonating with calm acceptance. "I have seen the path you walk. I sense the turmoil in you, the potential for both great destruction and perhaps redemption." Starkiller felt his anger flare. He lunged, driving her into a desperate parry. They exchanged furious blows, sparks and echoes reverberating through the ancient halls. She was skilled, surprisingly so, and her unwavering stance belied her advanced age. Nonetheless, Starkiller's strength in the dark side began to overwhelm her. His blows rained down with unstoppable force, and she scrambled back, forced to yield ground step by step. Yet even as she retreated, she made no attempt to exploit the environment or launch a cunning trap. Instead, she seemed to focus on him, her eyes brimming with compassion, a sentiment he both despised and found strangely unsettling. "This is not your destiny," she insisted, wincing as she deflected another blow. "You have a choice." Starkiller pressed forward ruthlessly, forcing her against a massive stone pillar. He disarmed her with a twist of his blade, knocking her lightsaber to the ground where it deactivated with a hiss. For a moment, he stood poised, blade raised, ready to deliver the final strike. She knelt, head bowed. "If you must kill me, then kill me," she said softly. "But remember, there is still good in you, even if you deny it." He froze, the saber humming centimeters from her neck. His eyes blazed with hatred, but in that second, he glimpsed a possible future. One in which he might reject everything the Sith had twisted him into being. He suppressed that thought viciously, because to entertain it was to risk weakening his resolve. He told himself that redemption was a fool's fantasy. Power was what mattered. The only way to transform the galaxy was to seize the throne of darkness itself. Hesitation vanished, and he cut her down with a swift arc. The chamber fell silent, save for the echo of the bee. In the aftermath, Starkiller felt the stirrings of shame. Her words clung to him like a film he could not easily wipe away, but he pushed it aside with savage determination. As the last conspirator's life ebbed away, the final threat was neutralized. He could now report to Vader that the mission was a success, and that, in turn, would bring him ever closer to an audience with the Emperor. He did not speak of the woman's words to Vader. When the Dark Lord arrived, he merely stated that she had resisted until the end, but ultimately succumbed to the superior power of the dark side. Vader gave him a single, long glance through the masked visor. If Vader sensed any internal conflict, he did not comment on it. Instead, they returned to Coruscant in triumph, leaving behind only the ashes of that final bastion of conspiracy. Upon their return, the Emperor summoned Starkiller alone. The private audience chamber felt even colder and more claustrophobic than before. Starkiller knelt as instructed, but Sidious beckoned him to stand, an ominous gesture that implied a shift in their dynamic. "You have impressed me, young one," the Emperor said, his voice like dry leaves in a storm. "Your mastery grows daily, and your cunning is commendable. Lord Vader speaks of your efficiency, though I suspect he underestimates the depth of your potential. That amuses me." Starkiller remained silent, carefully schooling his face. Sidious paced in front of him, hands clasped. Power is a curious thing. A Sith must always seek more, but a wise Sith knows that patience serves ambition better than reckless haste. He paused, turning to regard Starkiller with a penetrating stare. "Tell me, do you crave power as Lord Vader does?" Starkiller forced himself to look thoughtful, though his heart pounded with excitement. "I crave to be of service, my Emperor, to see your vision fulfilled." "Lies?" Sidious snapped, though he did not seem angry, rather gleeful. "Your deflection is transparent. But do not worry, child. I welcome such ambition. The dark side is infinite, its secrets boundless. If your hunger drives you to surpass your limitations, you may prove yourself indispensable to me. However, the path will not be easy." Starkiller bowed his head slightly. "I understand, my master." Sidious smiled thinly. "You understand nothing yet, but perhaps you will. There is a matter that requires delicate handling. A certain network of powerful individuals on Coruscant itself have become problematic. They are neither openly rebellious nor entirely loyal. I need someone with your talents to send them a clear message." Starkiller listened closely as the Emperor outlined the task. The targets were wealthy elites who profited from the Empire's expansion. Though they publicly supported Sidious, they had begun to hedge their bets, secretly funding certain rebellious groups. These were not mere criminals. They held tremendous influence over entire trade routes, planetary economies, and even imperial bureaucracies. The Emperor wanted them publicly humiliated and quietly disposed of. But the matter had to be handled in a way that would not disrupt the Empire's stability. Fear was acceptable. Chaos was not. "You will act with precision," Sidious commanded. "Root out their complicity, provide evidence of their treachery to the Holonet, then strike them down before they can mount any defense or flight. The galaxy will see that even the wealthiest are not above our justice, and the Empire's hold will tighten. Starkiller knelt once more. It shall be done, my Emperor. That night, Starkiller found lodging in one of the Imperial facilities on Coruscant. As he paced the dimly lit room, the humming metropolis beyond the window reminded him of just how central this world was to the Empire's entire infrastructure. His mind raced with possibilities. If he succeeded in this mission, he would further solidify his standing with the Emperor. Sidious, for all his cruelty, was also known to reward competence, at least to a point. But Starkiller also recognized the complexity of the challenge. These targets were not soldiers or force users. They were people with wealth, influence, and cunning. Assassinating them outright would be simple enough, but the Emperor wanted a spectacle, a subtle but unmistakable demonstration of power. Evidence had to be planted, transmissions had to be orchestrated, and the timing of each elimination had to converge into a single, decisive event. And all the while, he had to remain cautious of Vader's scrutiny. If Vader perceived him as too valuable to the Emperor, the Dark Lord might act to neutralize his own apprentice. In the days that followed, Starkiller executed the assignment with ruthless finesse. He compiled data leaks, forging documents that implicated the elites in conspiracies to fund insurgencies. Using infiltration droids, he accessed secure networks in the heart of Coruscant's elite districts, leaving digital breadcrumbs that would lead investigators right back to the conspirators' vaults. Meanwhile, he tracked each target's schedule, location, and security detail with painstaking care. The operation required more subterfuge than raw force power, but he was learning quickly that a Sith's real strength also lay in cunning and deception. Finally, when all was set, he enacted the plan in a single night. The holonet exploded with revelations of the elite's treason. Imperial news anchors feigned outrage and condemnation. Citizens across the galaxy watched in fascination as the colossal scandal unfolded, overshadowing other events. The conspirators themselves scrambled to defend their reputations, each trying to shift blame onto the others. But they had no time to rally, for one by one, Starkiller struck. Some fell to poison that mimicked a heart attack, others disappeared from their private skyhooks, never to be seen again. For the most heavily guarded, Starkiller employed the dark side directly, infiltrating secure manors under the cover of night and dispatching entire squads of guards with silent, lethal efficiency. By dawn, no conspirator remained alive. Their resources were seized, their estates left in ruin, their names forever marked with treachery. The Empire's propaganda machine worked overtime to celebrate the swift justice. Everyone understood the message. No one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, was safe from the Emperor's wrath. When Starkiller stood before Sidious again, the Emperor looked almost amused. "Excellent," he purred. "You have exceeded my expectations, dear boy. Perhaps Lord Vader has finally found a worthy successor to carry out the dark side's agenda across the galaxy." Starkiller bristled at the word successor, but maintained his composure. "I serve the Empire, my Emperor. I will do whatever is required." Sidious's smile twisted. "Yes, I sense your obedience, but I also sense your growing desire for more. Let me offer you some advice. If you truly seek greater power, you must be prepared to confront its current holder. The line of Sith succession is a chain of violence. Perhaps you are strong enough to challenge Lord Vader someday, but you must prove yourself in many more trials before such a thing can be considered." These words slithered into Starkiller's mind, confirming a suspicion he'd nurtured for a while. Sidious was engineering a rivalry between Vader and himself, as was the Sith tradition of master and apprentice. The Emperor would let them vie for supremacy, ensuring that only the strongest would stand at his side. And while Starkiller despised the notion of being manipulated, he also recognized the opportunity. If he could outmaneuver Vader, if he could somehow catch him off guard, he might ascend in the Emperor's eyes. The moment of confrontation came sooner than expected. Vader summoned Starkiller aboard his personal Star Destroyer, the Executor, en route to quell yet another insurrection. Upon arriving in the vast hangar, Starkiller felt the imposing presence of the Dark Lord like a thundercloud pressing down on him. Stormtroopers stood at attention as he passed, but their silent white masks did nothing to ease his tension. He could feel that something had changed, a disturbance in the force that vibrated with lethal intent. Inside Vader's private chamber, Starkiller waited as mechanical systems hissed and sealed behind him. Vader stood with his back turned, helmet poised as if studying the starfield through the wide viewport. The rhythmic rasp of his respirator was the only sound in the room for a moment. "You have grown powerful, my apprentice," Vader stated, voice resonating within the enclosed space. "The Emperor praises your cunning and skill. That is unusual." Starkiller swallowed. "I have carried out our missions effectively, my master. My loyalty remains unwavering." Vader turned, black cape flowing about him. "Does it?" His tone was measured, devoid of the usual arrogance. "The Emperor may fill your head with promises, but know this. I have served him far longer than you. I understand his manipulations. If you believe he will place you above me without reason, you are more naive than I imagined." Something in Vader's posture spoke not just of threat, but also a twisted sense of warning. As if the Dark Lord was cautioning him, "Be careful, for Sidious's favor is a double-edged blade." Perhaps Vader saw in Starkiller the same trap Sidious had once laid for him. Starkiller steeled himself. "I only seek to fulfill the Emperor's will. If my success has gained his attention, I cannot be held accountable for that." Vader's gloved hand flexed. "You speak with defiance, though you mask it with subservience. Do you think I am blind to ambition?" He stalked closer, and the room's lights gleamed against the black of his helmet. "The Sith Code speaks of the chain that sets us free. Passion, strength, power, victory. These are the pillars by which we rise. But you must remember your place, my apprentice." Starkiller wanted to lash out, to demonstrate that he was no longer a mere puppet. But he also recognized that Vader was still an immense force of darkness, second only to Sidious. The time for direct confrontation was not yet. With a subtle inclination of his head, Starkiller bowed slightly. "I hear your warning, my master. I will remain loyal." Vader seemed to regard him for a tense moment. Then he turned away again, gesturing to a data console. "We have our next assignment. The Emperor has ordered us to Dathomir. Reports suggest that a hidden clan of Night Sisters has survived our previous campaigns. They dabble in dark magic, a threat the Emperor will not tolerate. We leave at once." Starkiller nodded, though his mind whirled with questions. Night Sisters? His missions had rarely led him into the realm of dark side sorcery, but he knew their reputation. Formidable, cunning, and unpredictable. This would be a significant challenge. Yet he also sensed that Vader might be testing him personally, perhaps even hoping he would fail. The journey to Dathomir felt interminable. Starkiller spent most of it alone in a small meditation chamber, wrestling with conflicting instincts. On the one hand, the Emperor's words were like a siren call, urging him to grow stronger and bide his time until he could confront Vader openly. On the other hand, he was still shackled by the paternal hold Vader had over him, the memory of being raised and trained by this terrifying figure who was both father and tormentor. The old Jedi's words, the conspirators' final pleas, the nights he spent reading the data logs about Force-sensitive children. It all converged into a swirl of doubt. If he truly wanted to end the cycle, he would need to become the new face of the dark side, or destroy the Sith entirely. But if he destroyed the Sith, what would he become? After dropping out of hyperspace, the Executor hovered in orbit above Dathomir's crimson surface. Starkiller felt the planet's dark aura even from the starship's vantage. Upon descending to the surface in a Lambda shuttle, he and Vader were greeted by thick, tangled forests and a foreboding atmosphere that reeked of ancient power. Stormtroopers formed perimeter lines, but Vader ordered them to remain outside the deeper forests. This was to be a mission of the Force, not a mundane military campaign. Starkiller would accompany Vader directly into the heart of the Night Sisters' domain. Traversing the twisted flora and crimson canopies, they felt watchful eyes at every turn. The planet itself seemed alive with malevolent energy, every vine and branch a potential trap. Starkiller recognized illusions creeping at the edges of his perception. shapes shifting in the distance, voices that whispered out of earshot, faint silhouettes sliding between the trees. Yet he held his focus, pressing forward alongside Vader, whose very presence kept the illusions at bay. Finally, they arrived at a clearing dominated by jagged rock formations. There, a circle of Night Sisters awaited, led by a tall, gaunt woman draped in tattered robes. Her skin bore intricate tattoos, and her eyes shone with feral intensity. She lifted her arms, chanting in an archaic tongue. Green smoke coalesced around her fingertips, forming ephemeral shapes that crackled with dark energy. Vader ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade humming ominously. Starkiller followed suit, stance alert. The Night Sisters' leader hissed a command, and her coven moved with supernatural speed, attacking with alchemical whips and conjured beasts made from the green mist. The battle erupted in a cacophony of howls, lightsaber clashes, and swirling energy. Vader waded into the fray with brutal efficiency, cutting down any Night Sister who ventured too close, while deflecting sorceress strikes. Starkiller matched him blow for blow, spinning through the chaos, unleashing force pushes that sent entire clusters of witches flying. Yet the Night Sisters' magic was potent. One by one, twisted revenants rose from the ground, undead warriors bound to the witch's will. They lunged at the Sith with unholy strength, their vacant eyes locked on their targets. Starkiller sliced through them, but they kept coming, limbs regenerating in bursts of green flame. He switched tactics, summoning the dark side in a fiery torrent of force lightning that incinerated several at once. Still, the witches fought on. Vader showed little sign of fatigue, cutting a path toward the Coven's leader. He gestured, and a wave of telekinetic energy slammed the witches to the ground. A few shrieked, clutching at their skulls as Vader telepathically crushed their minds. The leader snarled, raising her staff to channel a ferocious concentration of dark sorcery. Starkiller could sense the potency of the spell, something vile enough to rend even Vader's defenses if given time to manifest. In that crucial moment, Starkiller acted. He leaped forward, ignoring the undead that clawed at him, and unleashed a surge of lightning so intense that the night seemed to flash white. The Night Sister leader's staff exploded in her hands, and she fell to her knees, screaming as arcs of energy danced across her body. Vader capitalized on the opportunity, sweeping in to deliver a final blow with his lightsaber, severing her head in a clean strike. With the matriarch's death, the magic animating the revenants began to falter. Their once cohesive assault dissolved into disarray, and the remaining Night Sisters scattered into the forest. Vader, lightsaber still ignited, surveyed the carnage. Starkiller stood amid smoking corpses, breathing heavily. He had survived, and his timely intervention had preserved Vader from a lethal sorceress assault. Vader deactivated his blade, the red glow disappearing into the hilt. "Your power grows," he stated, his voice neutral. Then he turned away, striding back toward the shuttle. The mission was complete, but Starkiller felt an unspoken tension simmering between them. He had just saved Vader's life, or at least prevented a catastrophic injury. By all rights, Vader should be grateful. Yet gratitude was not the way of the Sith. If anything, it could heighten Vader's suspicion. If the apprentice is strong enough to save the master, then the apprentice may also be strong enough to challenge him. They returned to the executor in silence. Once aboard, Vader left to report to the Emperor, and Starkiller was left alone in the Star Destroyer's corridors. He gazed out a viewport at the swirling red clouds of Dathomir below. His reflection stared back at him, framed by a galaxy rife with conflict. He felt that he was closer than ever to a pivotal juncture. Sure enough, within hours, a communication arrived from the Emperor's hologram, summoning Starkiller to an undisclosed location on Coruscant. He departed immediately in his own craft, not informing Vader. The coordinates led him to the underlevels of the Imperial City, deep beneath the glittering spires and bustling skylanes, where the darkness of the planet's foundations concealed countless secrets. The facility he arrived at was guarded by more of Sidious's red-robed guards, who conducted him through labyrinthine corridors until they reached a sealed chamber. Inside waited Darth Sidious, Standing alone in a dimly lit room, Starkiller knelt. The Emperor's face remained partially shrouded by his hood. The lines of his visage twisted into an inscrutable expression. "Your intervention on Dathomir was impressive," Sidious murmured. "You prevented a significant threat to Vader, and by extension, to our plans. Yet I sense you did not act solely out of loyalty. There is ambition in your heart, Starkiller. You wish to surpass Lord Vader." Starkiller hesitated, then answered in a measured tone. "I cannot deny my desire for greater power, my master, but I exist to serve the Empire." "Indeed?" Sidious asked, voice dripping with a blend of amusement and menace. "Power in service of the Empire can be a noble thing. But you are a Sith apprentice, even if Vader will not yet name you as such. The Sith path is one of ascension through conflict. Do you not yearn to test your might against Vader's?" Starkiller's eyes flickered. He thought of the humiliations, the manipulations, the oppressive hold Vader had over him since childhood. He also remembered the slivers of regret he felt each time he cut down someone who hinted at his possible redemption. But now, the Emperor of the Galaxy himself stood before him, practically inviting him to declare his intentions. "I have grown stronger," he said carefully. "If the time comes when I must prove my superiority, I will not shrink from that challenge." Sidious let out a dry cackle. Good. Such confidence befits a true Sith. But your final test has yet to come. When it does, I will be watching very closely, child." He moved closer, and Starkiller caught the stench of decay that clung to Sidious's robes. "Remember, though, should you fail, I will have no hesitation in discarding you. Let that knowledge sharpen your resolve." The Emperor dismissed him with a wave of his hand, and Starkiller left, mind ablaze with possibilities. Sidious wanted him to challenge Vader, that much was clear. The Emperor reveled in pitting his servants against one another, ensuring only the strongest remained. But was that truly what Starkiller wanted? If he defeated Vader, what then? Would he truly become the Emperor's puppet in Vader's place? Or could he overthrow Sidious as well, striking at the very core of the Empire's evil? The tension reached a boiling point after Starkiller undertook several more missions that placed him in direct contact with the Emperor rather than Vader. Rumors swirled among Imperial officers that Vader's apprentice was ascending in status. Some said Starkiller was to be the Emperor's personal enforcer, superseding Vader's authority. Others whispered that Sidious had grown weary of Vader's limitations and sought a new champion. These rumors eventually reached Vader himself. Soon after, Vader summoned Starkiller to Mustafar, the lava world where Vader had once suffered his catastrophic injuries. The meeting place was an obsidian fortress perched on the edge of a molten river. Starkiller felt the oppressive heat through the durasteel walkways and black stone passages. The air stank of sulfur and burned flesh. It was as though Vader chose this location to remind any challenger of the suffering he had endured and survived. In a dimly lit chamber, Vader stood, arms folded across his chest, towering like a monolith of dread. "Do you understand why I summoned you here?" he asked, voice resonating with an undercurrent of barely contained fury. Starkiller bowed. "I sense your anger, my master. Perhaps you feel I have been disloyal?" "Disloyal?" Vader repeated. He ignited his lightsaber, bathing the chamber in crimson light. "You consort with the Emperor behind my back. You gather power for yourself. Do you think me blind? The Emperor seeks to replace me, and you are the instrument of his betrayal." Starkiller tensed, hand drifting to his own lightsaber hilt. The faint hum of molten lava in the background seemed to intensify, as if the planet itself thirsted for bloodshed. "I have only done what I believed served the Empire," he said, though he felt the hollowness of the excuse. "You taught me to be strong, to seize power. Is that not the way of the Sith?" Vader's breathing quickened, and he raised his blade. "Then you have learned well, my apprentice. Now show me how far you have come." The challenge was unmistakable. Starkiller ignited his own crimson saber, the blade humming in resonance with Vader's. For a moment, they stood still, each measuring the other's stance. Then Vader attacked with ferocious power, driving forward with an onslaught of overhead strikes and wide arcs. Sparks flew as lightsaber met lightsaber. Starkiller channeled the dark side into his limbs, matching Vader's strength blow for blow, but each collision reverberated painfully. Vader's raw power was immense, and his technique, though direct, had been honed through countless battles. They clashed through the fortress's corridors, each trying to gain an advantage. Starkiller attempted to use agility to outmaneuver Vader, leaping off walls and flipping behind him to land quick strikes. Yet Vader adapted swiftly, unleashing telekinetic blasts that hurled Starkiller against the walls. The fight became a savage ballet of force pushes, thrown debris, and searing lightsaber duels. At one point, Vader cornered Starkiller near a collapsing balcony, the river of lava rushing below. Starkiller's muscles ached, and the sting of burns from glancing saber strikes fueled his rage. He unleashed a torrent of force lightning, forcing Vader to raise his lightsaber in a defensive stance, electricity crackling around the red blade. Seizing the moment, Starkiller lunged, aiming a precise thrust at Vader's chest. But Vader sidestepped with surprising agility, knocking Starkiller's lightsaber aside and slamming him with a brutal force push. Starkiller crashed into the black stone, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Vader advanced, ready to deliver a killing blow. In a flash of desperate inspiration, Starkiller recalled his training. Vader had taught him to conceal reserves of strength until the most critical moment. He summoned every scrap of hatred, every betrayal, every ounce of suffering. With a roar, he hurled a spiraling mass of telekinetic power at the ceiling above Vader. The stone cracked, sending molten rock cascading down in a fiery avalanche. Vader had to divert his attention to protect himself, raising a shield of dark side energy to deflect the lethal flow. That window was all Starkiller needed. He sprang up, lunged at Vader's now exposed flank, and drove his blade in. The crimson plasma bit into Vader's armor at the side of his torso, sending sparks and the stench of seared flesh into the air. Vader roared in pain. With a mechanical wheeze, the Dark Lord staggered, swinging his saber wildly. Starkiller leaped back to avoid the counterstrike. Vader fell to one knee, clutching the sizzling wound. His respirator gasped. Still, he refused to collapse entirely. "You dare strike me down?" he rasped. Starkiller advanced cautiously, blade lowered but not extinguished. He studied the damaged plating and the laborious rise and fall of Vader's chest. The cunning, merciless side of Starkiller screamed to finish the job, to claim victory once and for all. Yet something else, a vestige of twisted loyalty or perhaps pity, stayed his hand. They locked gazes, each measuring the other. Then Vader's voice rumbled, defiant. "End it, Apprentice. Show me that you have embraced the true nature of the dark side." Starkiller hesitated, his blade humming in the searing heat. He remembered the Emperor's words, the numerous missions, the manipulations, the raw cruelty. He remembered the sorrow in the eyes of that Jedi woman he had slain, and the old Jedi's cryptic encouragement to change things. A swirl of conflict raged inside him, but the dark side demanded resolution. With a cry that mingled triumph and despair, Starkiller thrust his lightsaber through Vader's chest plate, piercing circuits and flesh. Vader convulsed, releasing a final, rasping breath. Then the Dark Lord of the Sith, the one who had raised Starkiller, tormented him, shaped him, slumped forward lifeless. The fortress's floor shook as if in protest, and the molten river beyond hissed and roared. Starkiller stepped back, heart pounding, staring at the body of Darth Vader. The unthinkable had happened. Vader was dead by his hand. For a long moment, there was only silence and the distant rumble of lava. Starkiller's breath caught in his throat. He had done it. He had killed the man who had dominated his existence for so long. But what did that make him now? Before he could begin to process the implications, a cold, familiar presence touched his consciousness. He turned, and there, emerging from the shadows as if he had been watching all along, stood Darth Sidious, the Emperor himself. Dressed in dark robes, face twisted into a macabre grin. Sidious lifted his hands in a mocking applause. "Magnificent," Sidious purred, his yellow eyes gleaming. "You have done what even I could not. The chosen one has fallen by your blade. You are indeed worthy of being my new apprentice." Starkiller tensed, the adrenaline still surging. He hadn't sensed the Emperor's arrival. That alone spoke to Sidious's mastery of stealth and deception. Anger flared within him, the realization that this entire confrontation had likely been orchestrated. The Emperor had, perhaps, known this outcome was inevitable once he'd set the two on a collision course. Sidious stepped over Vader's broken form with a sneer of contempt, then turned his gaze to Starkiller. "Now, Lord Starkiller, kneel before me. Take your rightful place at my side, and together we shall bring this galaxy to heel." Starkiller felt the dark side coil around him like a serpent. He stared at Vader's body, recalling the lifetime of brutal lessons that had led to this moment. He also thought of the Emperor's unwavering tyranny, the countless atrocities committed in the name of power. If he knelt, he would become the new right hand of evil incarnate, inflicting more suffering, enslaving more lives. And yet, a part of him argued that if he truly wanted to change the galaxy, to end these horrors, perhaps he needed to step into the darkness fully, to seize Sidious's trust before striking him down. Or perhaps that was just another lie he told himself. Still, he lowered himself slowly to one knee, bowing his head in an outward show of submission. "Yes, my master," he said quietly, voice trembling with the aftershock of his duel and the swirl of conflicting emotions in his soul. Sidious smiled, a cruel and triumphant expression. "Rise then, Lord Starkiller. You are reborn as my apprentice. Let all who oppose us tremble." As Starkiller stood, he felt the force churn around him like a tempest. Whether this was the moment he became irredeemably lost or a moment that might set him on a course of ultimate betrayal against Sidious, he did not know. The future yawned before him like a black void. For now, the Emperor seemed satisfied, and the corpse of Darth Vader smoldered at their feet. An eerie testament to the cycle of Sith ambition. In the subsequent weeks, news of Vader's death was shrouded in secrecy. Officially, the Empire declared that Vader had perished in battle against renegade insurgents, upholding him as a fallen hero of the Imperial cause. Meanwhile, the Emperor discreetly introduced Lord Starkiller as a new, formidable enforcer, rumored to be even more terrifying than the late Dark Lord. Stormtroopers and officers whispered about his identity, but none dared question the Emperor's decree. Fear kept them in check, as it always had. The first time Starkiller walked through the Imperial Palace on Coruscant in his new role, he felt a strange mixture of hollow triumph and profound unease. Courtiers bowed or retreated as he passed, sensing the malevolence that radiated from him. Red-robed guards saluted with obsequious precision. And up ahead, in the Emperor's grand chamber, Darth Sidious waited, robed in shadows, eyes glowing with malicious satisfaction. "You have done well to assume your rightful place," Sidious said when Starkiller knelt before him. "But know that your trials are just beginning. The galaxy is vast, and the Force holds many secrets. Your loyalty to me must be absolute, for if you falter, you shall meet the same end as your predecessor." Starkiller rose, trying to mask the turmoil roiling within. "I understand, my master," he replied, voice carefully controlled. "The galaxy will know your indomitable will. I will be your instrument." Sidious inclined his head, then gestured to a nearby viewport overlooking the teeming cityscape of Coruscant. "Our empire stands on the brink of a new era, Lord Starkiller. With Vader gone, the shackles of the past are severed. Now we shall forge a future drenched in the power of the dark side. Serve me well, and in time, you shall learn secrets of the Force beyond even Vader's comprehension." That promise, that glimmer of forbidden knowledge, was the hook Sidious used to reel Starkiller in further. Already, Starkiller could feel an amplified flow of dark side energy coursing through him. Whether it was the Emperor's direct influence or his own unleashed rage, he did not know, but the effect was undeniable. His reflexes, senses, and command over the Force seemed sharper, more potent. Yet amid this heightened power lurked a growing sense of disquiet. Each night, Starkiller tried to meditate, his brand of meditation being a swirl of black emotion, thoughts of vengeance, and images of destruction. But sometimes, in the corners of his mind, he saw the faces of those he had killed. Jedi, Night Sisters, conspirators, and Darth Vader himself. He heard the old Jedi's voice. "You can change things," and it haunted him that he had chosen this path. Perhaps he had changed nothing except the color of the mask worn by the Sith enforcer. The Emperor wasted no time in giving him new assignments. Battlefronts across the galaxy demanded the presence of a strong leader to crush rebellions and break the spirit of resistance. One such conflict raged on Kashyyyk, where the Wookiees persisted in their defiance of Imperial enslavement. Another simmered in the Outer Rim, where pirate lords had allied with scattered rebel cells. In each case, Sidious commanded that Starkiller move swiftly and mercilessly to extinguish all opposition, ensuring that the memory of Vader's brutality would be eclipsed by Starkiller's wrath. Starkiller, clad in dark armor reminiscent of Vader's but modified to reflect his own style, descended upon these battlefronts like a storm. On Kashyyyk, he deployed terrifying force techniques that uprooted massive rasher trees, collapsing entire sections of forest onto unsuspecting rebel fortifications. The Wookiees fought fiercely, but they were no match for a dark side wielder whose powers had been honed to lethal perfection. Without Vader's imposing figure, the Empire's forces initially wavered, but when they witnessed Starkiller's destructive might, they rallied in fear and awe. The aftermath on Kashyyyk left Starkiller with a bitter taste. He witnessed the rounding up of Wookiee survivors, forced into labor camps and shipping crates. The blackened forest stumps bore silent witness to the ecological ruin inflicted by the Empire. The sight reminded Starkiller of the brutality he once resented in Vader. Now he perpetuated it himself, and each act of cruelty seemed to bind him tighter to the dark side's thrall. On the Outer Rim, Starkiller obliterated pirate enclaves and rebel hideouts with surgical strikes, employing advanced infiltration tactics and lethal force abilities. There, he cultivated a reputation among the Imperials, someone who was even more efficient than Vader had been. Officers who had feared Vader now trembled at the mention of Lord Starkiller, whispering rumors that he was a being forged entirely of darkness and pain. Sidious observed these actions with grim approval. He occasionally summoned Starkiller back to Coruscant for debriefings and private lessons in Sith lore, revealing obscure rituals that probed the depths of the dark side. Each ritual demanded a sacrifice, an unleashing of raw emotion, be it hatred, rage, or despair, and each time Starkiller found it easier to discard any lingering qualms. The old doubts receded like shadows before a blazing inferno of ambition and fear. Still, a kernel of something remained unextinguished. Each time Starkiller enacted Sidious's commands, a small voice in the recesses of his mind questioned the ultimate purpose. Was the galaxy forever doomed to cower under the yoke of the Sith? Was there no alternative but to rule through fear and death? The Emperor promised knowledge, but knowledge in service of what? Absolute tyranny? Endless suffering? Even as he ascended in rank and fearsome reputation, Starkiller felt a restless dissatisfaction. The Emperor sensed it too, for one day, he confronted Starkiller in the very throne room where he once tested him with lightning. Sidious stood at the center of the darkened chamber, his silhouette outlined by the harsh glow of overhead lights. "I sense conflict in you," Sidious rasped. "Have you grown complacent or uncertain?" Starkiller bowed formally. "I am certain of the dark side's power, my master. There is no question of my loyalty to the Empire." Sidious's laughter was like brittle parchment rustling. "Oh, but there is more to power than loyalty. I have given you freedom to spread fear across the galaxy, but I can taste your hesitation. Do not think it goes unnoticed." Starkiller tried to tamp down any visible reaction. "I am a Sith as you made me. My hesitation, if any, stems only from wanting to ensure I execute your will with absolute precision." Sidious sneered, though amusement glinted in his malevolent eyes. "Is that so? Then prove it. I have found a rather unique target for you, one that should test both your skill and your conviction." a Jedi Knight, thought long dead, has resurfaced in the expansion region. He has gathered followers and even some sympathetic forces from planetary militias. Go, Lord Starkiller. Snuff out this last remnant of the Jedi. Leave no survivors. A chill spread through Starkiller, though he kept his face impassive. Another Jedi? The Emperor's purge had supposedly exterminated them all, save for a precious few who remained in hiding. Yet they continued to appear, like faint stars in a black sky. A piece of him almost admired their resilience. But that admiration would not spare them. He bowed low. "It shall be done, my master." Sidious nodded, eyes burning. "Good. Do not fail me." Starkiller left the throne room, mind already pivoting to the mission. If he succeeded, he would further cement his place as the Emperor's chosen enforcer. Yet the prospect of facing another Jedi revived memories of his earlier conflicts. The old Jedi in the canyon, the conspirator on that unnamed planet, the Night Sisters' final pleas. Each had offered glimpses of an alternative path. One Starkiller had ultimately rejected. Now, confronted with another Jedi, he found himself wondering if the same pattern would repeat. Would the Jedi's final words haunt him anew? Several days later, Starkiller emerged from hyperspace with a detachment of star destroyers. The coordinates pointed to a lush planet that maintained a precarious neutrality in the ongoing galactic struggles. According to intelligence, the Jedi and his allies operated in a hidden enclave beneath the dense canopy of ancient forests. Stormtroopers deployed, establishing forward outposts and methodically combing the terrain. The presence of an Imperial fleet orbiting overhead left little doubt that the planet's neutrality was about to be shattered. Eventually, the scouts pinpointed the Enclave's location. Starkiller led an elite force through the winding forest paths, forging deeper into the wilderness. The atmosphere was thick with humidity and the hum of unseen creatures. Vines draped across mossy trunks, and beams of sunlight broke through the canopy in scattered patches. Despite the serene beauty, tension crackled in the Force. Starkiller could sense the Jedi's presence, like a beacon of calm resisting the ocean of darkness he carried within. At last, they reached a clearing where makeshift fortifications had been erected. A cadre of militia soldiers manned barricades. As soon as Starkiller's force approached, alarms sounded, and the militia opened fire. Stormtroopers returned a withering volley of blaster bolts. Starkiller strode through the hail of fire, deflecting shots with his lightsaber. Each scorching bolt repelled harmlessly into the air. The militia's lines faltered, and he advanced relentlessly, cutting down any who stood in his way. Through the chaos, he saw the Jedi emerge. A man in middle age, bearing the ragged garments of someone in hiding but holding himself with a poised dignity. His lightsaber, a bright green blade, sprang to life. He commanded the militia to retreat further into the Enclave, covering them with skillful deflections of blaster fire. For a moment, their eyes met across the battlefield. Starkiller sensed no fear, only sorrow and determination in the Jedi's gaze. In a single bound augmented by the Force, Starkiller leaped over the barricade, landing a few paces from the Jedi. The surrounding militia scattered, leaving the two Force users to face each other. Blades hummed menacingly, red versus green, a timeless clash of darkness and light. "I don't want to fight you," the Jedi said, voice raised above the din. "Lay down your weapons. We can end this without more bloodshed." Starkiller's response was to lunge. Their sabers clashed, sending a burst of sparks into the air. The Jedi was nimble, countering Starkiller's heavy strikes with swift evasions. Starkiller recognized that this Jedi was no novice. He fought with the practiced ease of a veteran. The undergrowth crackled under their feet as they wove through the clearing in a furious dance of lethal arcs and parries. "Why do you serve the Empire?" the Jedi shouted, ducking a slash aimed at his neck. "Have you no mind of your own? No sense of the destruction you're causing?" Starkiller snarled, summoning the dark side to augment his next blow. The Jedi barely managed to block it, his feet skidding on the damp ground. "You speak as though you know me," Starkiller spat. "All I know is the power of the dark side, and that power demands your extinction." The Jedi exhaled, a tinge of sadness flickering in his expression. Then you are truly lost. Their duel escalated, lightsabers flashing in brilliant arcs. Soldiers from both sides watched with bated breath, the clash of Force users far beyond their abilities to interrupt. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, the shadows deepening with every strike. Starkiller pressed relentlessly, striking low and then high, whirling with a backhand slash that forced the Jedi to flip backward. The Jedi landed gracefully, using the Force to propel fallen logs as obstacles. Starkiller sliced them apart midair with contemptuous ease. Yet, in the midst of the battle, the Jedi glimpsed an opening. He slid under one of Starkiller's heavier strikes and slashed upward, catching Starkiller's arm. The crimson blade clattered from Starkiller's grasp as he recoiled, sparks flying from damaged armor. Seizing the opportunity, the Jedi raised his green blade, poised for a finishing blow. At that moment, Starkiller unleashed a hidden reserve of power. A pulse of Force energy erupted from him, sending the Jedi staggering backward. Starkiller called his lightsaber back to his hand, reigniting the blade with a snap hiss. Before the Jedi could fully recover, Starkiller lunged and locked sabers with him in a bone-jarring clinch. The Jedi's face twisted with strain. Stop! This doesn't have to end in death. But Starkiller was past reasoning. He felt the Emperor's orders coursing through him, the memory of Vader's lifeless body, the weight of all his sins, and the suffocating darkness that had become his identity. He pressed forward, driving the Jedi to his knees. With a final twist of his wrist, he disarmed the Jedi, sending the green saber tumbling away. Silence descended on the clearing. The militia had either fled or been pinned down by stormtroopers. The Jedi knelt, breathing hard, looking up at Starkiller with a mixture of resignation and pity. "You are a slave," the Jedi said softly, tears glistening in his eyes. "To the Emperor, to the dark side. But you can break free. There is always a choice." Starkiller froze, blade humming inches from the Jedi's neck. Those words echoed too closely to the pleas of so many before. His muscles trembled with indecision. Then, in a move as swift as an exhalation, he brought the saber down. The Jedi's body collapsed, life fading into the Force with a final, shuddering breath. In the hush that followed, Starkiller stared at the fallen Jedi, chest heaving. Another life snuffed out, another small spark of light extinguished from a galaxy that had so few left. He could feel the dark side singing in his veins, congratulating him on his victory. Yet a cold knot in his stomach told him this was no triumph, only another step down a path he might never escape. Stormtroopers rushed in, securing the area and rounding up whatever militia fighters remained. Starkiller turned away, armor splattered with mud and scorch marks, eyes haunted. This was the life he had chosen. He had overthrown Vader and bound himself to Sidious, believing that the path to ultimate power might one day free him or let him reshape the galaxy. But each kill, each atrocity, only ensnared him deeper, and the Emperor's grin grew wider with every victory he delivered. Returning to Coruscant, Starkiller reported his success to Darth Sidious, who received him with that familiar twisted smile. "Excellent, my apprentice. The Jedi are but embers in a fire long since burned out. Soon, even those embers will be cold ash, thanks to you." Starkiller did not reply. Sidious waved a hand, dismissing the retinue of officers and leaving only the two of them in the chamber. He leaned forward on his throne. "Tell me, Lord Starkiller, do you ever regret your destiny?" The question took Starkiller aback. It was uncharacteristic of Sidious to probe so directly into emotions. He chose his words carefully. "Regret is for the weak, my master. The dark side is my strength." Sidious cackled softly. "Is it now? Good. For if you ever harbor doubts, remember that I have no tolerance for weakness. You have replaced Vader, and in doing so, you have taken on the mantle of terror that he once wore. Embrace it. Let the galaxy cower. Only then will you harness the true depths of the dark side." Starkiller bowed his head in feigned submission. "I understand, my master." Within, he felt a tempest of emotions. He had overthrown Darth Vader, achieving the unthinkable. Yet now he stood in Vader's place, bound more tightly than ever to Sidious's will. The galaxy still lay under the suffocating rule of an emperor who thrived on manipulation and fear. Starkiller had changed everything, and nothing. Still, the voice of that old Jedi from so long ago, the one in the canyon, the conspirator's final words, and this recent Jedi's plea echoed in the recesses of his mind. Maybe one day he would find the strength or cunning to break the chains binding him and overthrow Sidious as well. But the Sith tradition would not end easily, and Sidious was a cunning adversary. For now, Starkiller was trapped in a labyrinth of his own making, carrying forward the Emperor's dark legacy as the new right hand of terror. And beyond the palace walls, the galaxy continued to turn, each new dawn bringing fresh horrors and faint hopes, with millions of lives caught between the unstoppable might of the Empire and the scattered embers of rebellion. Starkiller knew that if he was to truly alter the fate of the galaxy, he would need more than raw power. He would need the courage to face the darkness within himself. But that courage was a distant, tenuous spark, nearly drowned out by the thunderous voice of the dark side whispering in his ear, "You have no choice." Yet somewhere beneath that thunder, another voice, quiet and persistent, repeated a familiar refrain. "You can change things." Such was the burden Starkiller bore as he looked out over the sprawling lights of Coruscant, the throne of the Empire at his back, and wondered if he had simply traded one form of servitude for another. For now, the Emperor's new apprentice remained locked in a deadly game of power and subjugation. His future an unwritten page in the annals of the dark side, and perhaps, just perhaps, a crucial fork in the road for the entire galaxy.